Mini Test 3. 1. Biology. Listen to a lecture in a biology class.
Our next topic is mimicry in animals. See, in nature, animals have different ways of defending themselves from predators. Some animals change their behavior to become less appealing to those that are hunting them, such as when an opossum plays dead. But others have an evolutionary defense mechanism through which they are able to change their appearance in order to discourage predators. This is called mimicry. Okay? Mimicry. But don't confuse mimicry with camouflage. Camouflage is when an animal takes on the appearance, looks like its surroundings, but mimicry refers specifically to the instances when an animal models its appearance after another organism. Are we all clear with that? Great. Why don't we discuss some more specific types of mimicry then? Well, then, I guess we can start with Bayesian mimicry. Bayesian mimicry is when an animal mimics the appearance of another in order to protect itself from predators. The real distinguishing factor between Bayesian mimicry and other types of mimicry is that in Bayesian mimicry, the animal that changes its appearance has no characteristic of its own that would discourage predators otherwise. Let me explain further. See, it isn't as though animals just randomly pick another animal to mimic. They model themselves after animals that either taste really icky, bad, or are poisonous. By looking like a poisonous species, predators are going to pass over them when they are out hunting. Are we all still on the same page? Why don't I give you all an example just to clarify? Okay, so let's consider the Brazilian butterfly, Pyrdeae. There's no real reason why a bird wouldn't want to eat one of these guys except for one thing. It looks exactly like a butterfly from the Heliconidae family. The Heliconidae are not a species that birds are interested in eating because, well, they taste funky, unusual and not at all tasty. Just by having similar coloration as the Heliconidae, the Pyrdeae are able to escape getting eaten. So basically, the tasty Pyrdeae looks like the not-so-tasty Heliconidae, and thus avoids predation. Pretty cool, huh? Anyway, the case of the Pyrdeae butterfly was the first time that this type of mimicry was observed by a man named Henry Bates, hence the name. But don't be fooled. Bayesian mimicry occurs in all types of bugs, cockroaches, all different kinds. Scientists haven't completely figured out how animals evolve to have the same coloring and features as other animals, but genetic research has revealed that the patterns of color inheritance is probably influenced by geography. That means that bugs from different areas have different genes to determine which species they mimic. If there aren't any questions, I think we should talk some about Müllerian mimicry. Okay, after the discovery of Bayesian mimicry, scientists started studying mimicry in all sorts of animals. What scientists noticed, though, were animals that had a defense mechanism of their own, yet they still mimicked other species. This was called the Bayesian paradox, because it made no sense at all for an organism that was already unappetizing to predators to mimic another animal. Then a German zoologist named Fritz Müller proposed that the reason an organism would do this is so that predators would learn their lesson about not eating them from another inedible species that looks like them. Does that make sense? Here, let me put it this way. See, birds and other predators aren't born knowing which bugs are good to eat and which ones are going to make them sick or whatever. So when a bug with its own defense mechanism mimics another type of bug, it benefits because then the predator learns not to eat them by first trying a different but similar-looking species. And once the predator learns, it's going to avoid bugs that resemble it. Think of it as kind of like a warning pattern that's shared between many bugs. In fact, the group of bugs that share the pattern, which is called a mimicry ring by the way, usually go through some signal standardization. All that means is that all the animals in the mimicry ring evolve in order to have the same warning signal.
1. How does the professor organize the information about mimicry that she presents to the class? 2. Why does the professor mention opossums? 3. What does the professor imply when she says this?
But don't confuse mimicry with camouflage. Camouflage is when an animal takes on the appearance, looks like its surroundings, but mimicry refers specifically to the instances when an animal models its appearance after another organism.
Four. What does the professor imply about how predators choose their prey? 5. Based on information from the lecture, to which type of mimicry does each statement relate? Place a check mark in the correct box. Two. History. Listen to a discussion in a history class.
This week, we studied the beginnings of agricultural societies in two different parts of the world, the Nile River Valley and Mesoamerica. Now, the reason I wanted to go over that was to provide you all with a foundation for understanding agriculture as we know it today. But when I was reading your reaction papers, it seemed that most of you have confused a lot of the information we went over. For today, let's get everything cleared up by talking about some of the ways that these two cultures differed in their early approaches to agriculture. Can anyone start?
Okay, given the geographic differences between the two, there were some obvious differences in the way that they grew crops.
What do you mean exactly? Can you give the class an example, maybe?
Well, I guess both cultures had to deal with pretty rough terrain. The Egyptians were out in the middle of the desert, but they had the Nile River as a source of water, so they came up with a system of using the Nile to their advantage by controlling the water. Didn't one of the Egyptian kings actually build a dam or something for irrigation purposes?
That would be King Menes. And you might remember that later, floodwater from the Nile was channeled 12 miles into Lake Moeris, so it could be used later. So how did the Mesoamericans handle irrigation?
Well, they were also growing on inhospitable terrain, and unlike the Egyptians, they didn't really have a huge river like the Nile to fulfill their water needs. But didn't they build reservoirs or something?
I think you might be getting confused here. The Mesoamericans are known more for their extensive canals that would run into areas that didn't get much rain. They also carved terraces out of hills in order to keep the irrigation water from washing all the fertile soil away. What other technique did the Mesoamericans use to improve land and water use?
They also built islands in the middle of lakes so they could take advantage of the water source.
That's right. Okay, let's move on. Now, in terms of food production, how did these two cultures differ?
Well, for one, the crops were completely different. In Egypt, they grew millet, barley, and wheat, but that stuff didn't even exist in Mesoamerica. Down there, they grew corn, avocados, and, of course, cacao.
I'm glad you brought that up. In case you all forgot, cocoa is the plant that we use to make chocolate now. In fact, a lot of the crops from Mesoamerica are really popular food items now and couldn't be found in Europe before exploration, such as the tomato.
Sorry, I hope this isn't too off topic, but I was just wondering if it took a long time for the Mesoamericans to cultivate those food items. I guess it just seems like they're all such an important part of the culture that it must have been around for a long time.
You're actually not that off topic because that's another way that these two agricultural societies were different. To answer your question, it took a relatively long time for the Mesoamericans to begin to cultivate food. The Egyptians started cultivating their staple crops as early as 5000 BCE. Meanwhile, according to archaeological evidence, the Mesoamericans didn't really get started until 3500 BCE. Additionally, food cultivation in Mesoamerica was closely tied to the domestication of corn. In Egypt, they started cultivating food as soon as domesticated animals from the Middle East were introduced.
Wow, that's like a 1,500-year difference. Why did it take so long?
It's probably a combination of many different factors, but most archaeologists agree that the infertile and dry lands throughout Mesoamerica probably had something to do with it.
That makes sense, because if you think about it, that meant that the Mesoamericans had to come up with the infrastructure and technology just to be able to use the land. I guess it would take a couple of 100 years to figure out how to do that.
6. How is the discussion organized? Seven. Why does the professor discuss tomatoes? 8. What can be inferred about corn in Mesoamerica? 9. What does the professor imply about the influence of domesticated animals on agriculture? 10. Based on information from the discussion, indicate whether the statements below describe Egyptian culture or Mesoamerican culture. Place a check mark in the correct box. Three. Office hours. Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Hi, Professor Mathis.
Sheila, thanks for coming in. I don't expect this to take long, so don't worry.
Okay. I'm sorry, but do you mind if I ask why you asked me to come?
Have a seat. Look, the reason I wanted to talk to you is because I'm a bit concerned about your performance in our discussion section. I didn't want to put you on the spot in front of the class, and that's why I asked to speak to you privately.
Oh.
Sheila, you've been a great student so far. You're always prepared when you come to class, and your essays are a delight to read. But in discussions, you never say anything.
It's just that, I don't know, it's just so nerve-wracking for me. Honestly, I would really like to, but whenever I want to contribute something, it just sounds so dumb in my head, or someone else says it first.
I thought it might be something like that. The problem is this. Participation is mandatory, and it accounts for 20% of your final grade. Maybe there's something we can do to make you feel more comfortable.
Like what?
Well, first off, have some confidence in your intelligence. You really don't have to worry that the things you say sound dumb. I assure you they're not. And I think you'd find that the other students would appreciate your unique perspective.
I guess so. It's not just that, though. There's just something about speaking in front of people that makes me really nervous. I feel as though I get so caught up trying to calm myself down that I really can't even come up with anything to say.
The solution to that is easy. Here's what you do. When you come into class, just sit down and listen. Don't think about what you should say or when you should say it. Just listen. If you do that, you'll find that you'll form natural reactions to them, and that's what you'll express when it's your turn to talk. Does that make sense?
It does, actually. And to be honest, I've never really tried that.
Good. I would really hate for your final grade to be dragged down by your participation, especially since I know that you must have many interesting things to contribute. Also, I guess the whole situation just made me question my abilities as a facilitator.
No, it's not that at all. Well, can I maybe give you a suggestion?
Of course.
Well, I think it's been much easier for me to participate when you've handed out a list of questions as a guide, instead of just letting everybody rattle off about a random topic.
You know, I can see where you're coming from with that. I'll think about doing that more often. Well, anyway, I hope I've been able to help you.
You have, and I promise that I'll make more of an effort to participate from now on.
11. What does the professor imply about the student's academic ability? (12) What can be inferred about the student's participation in class? (13) What does the student imply when she says this?
No, it's not that at all. Well, can I maybe give you a suggestion?
(14) Based on information from the conversation, indicate which of the suggestions below were given by the professor. Place a check mark in the correct box. (15) What will the student probably do next?